able to pay an alumni association fee. There are also other benefits in the other phases as well. So 2B, that is for parents who have served as a volunteer in the school, active community leaders. You can imagine, who are those people who will be able to volunteer?
Okay, again, people with the resources who can afford the time. And will these recent changes help even out the playing field?
There is no longer a distinction between whether or not you can pay a registration fee to enter the Alumni Association. So that is great because it also serves to make the originally very complicated system less complicated.
The latest change collapses phase 2A1 and 2A2 into one phase, 2A. There are now only 6 main categories in which a parent can register their child for primary school, down from the initial 7.
So I guess overall that's a good thing, right? Because it makes the school accessible to more people.
Well, the thing is, homeschool distance still feature in every stage except phase 1. And what is also important is that, in the new system, they add another 20 seats to phase 2C.
Ah, that's right.
Yes.
There were initially 20 seats each set aside in phase 2B and phase 2C at the start of P1 registration. There are now 20 more seats set aside in phase 2C.
So you can see visually, you are really distributing more seats to 2C from this original pile.
Right.
So there might be a squeeze over here. There are more seats at phase 2C. Parents or families who were initially inhibited because they were calculating their chances suddenly find that, hey, let's give it a shot. Why not?
That's right.
Parents with the means to buy a home within 1 kilometer would want to buy an additional layer of insurance. So even if they apply, they could apply for phase 2A. If they don't get it, they will try 2C.
So it seems the latest round of changes will not make much of a difference. Sure, the registration framework is a little bit less complicated, but that's going to just drive competition elsewhere. Because at the end of the day, where you live is still the biggest determining factor impacting your chances.
Is there any way we can make the system fairer for all?
What you suggested is pretty radical.
Turning trash into a message.
This time the artists can change the mindset of the peoples.
Planting to absorb carbon. Building a more climate resilient community.
Actually, the baseline of what we're doing is to support the fishermen and the wider community.
Asia's climate warriors. Tonight on CNA.
Enjoy a special journey through time in Gangnam. Join Justin and a historical commentator as they explore classical attractions and learn how life was like in ancient Korea, and find out why some traditions and cultures are still in fashion. Gangnam Insiders Picks, Sunday on CNA. This program is brought to you by the Gangnam-gu office.
Lush greenery and city living come together in District 10 with exceptional homes. Indulge in tranquil and lavish surroundings just minutes from chic urban conveniences. Step into the lush green homes in Singapore's Prime 10 district. Register your interest at cna.asia/exceptional homes. Presented by CNA Luxury and Property Guru. And supported by the following partners.
Tonight, why the Singapore property market continues to defy gravity from pandemic to endemic.
Most of the people are not selling first, they want to buy first.
and what lies ahead for the way we work and play.
There is a demand to come back to the office.
Is what tenant mix would actually create the best experience for your consumers.
Tonight at 10:30 p.m.
So out of the over 200 parents that we polled, views are pretty much split down the middle when asked if every school is a good school.
I've learned that parents do prefer certain schools. Some make their choices based on a school's perceived academic prowess, others on a school's programs and values. But it's always the same few schools that are hotly contested during the Primary 1 or P1 registration process. Short of relocating popular schools, I want to know if there is any way to make the system fairer. The person I'm meeting believes there might be a solution.
What I have here is the latest framework for Primary 1 registration. How do you think it can be further improved so that it's more fair?
Well, fair means that everyone gets a more level playing field.
Okay.
There's less time and energy spent strategizing by parents. This first criterion, child who has a sibling studying in the school, the children are young and it's a good thing in terms of parental logistics.
Okay, so you're saying we should keep this? This makes sense?
Yes. We move on to phase 2A, the alumni. That's inherited privilege, isn't it?
Let's take away 2A.
So probably we ought to remove this.
Okay.
A parent who's a member of the school advisory and management committee. Once again, it's parental privilege. Child whose parent is a staff member of the school, some might argue it's similar to having a sibling studying in the school. It's convenient for this particular group of parents. If you think of this as a kind of employment perk, we should say no to this too.
Okay.
This criterion doesn't privilege any particular group of parents, and we have to remember that these MOE kindergartens are affiliated to non-elite primary schools.
So that's 2A, pretty much wiped out. What about 2B?
Child whose parent is a volunteer at the school. Not every parent has the time or the resources to be a volunteer. And then membership in a church or clan that's affiliated with the school. This criterion only affects a small minority of schools in Singapore. So one might say we're looking for criteria that are consistent across all of our primary schools. And then we have community leadership. The entire primary school registration exercise is trying to accomplish too many competing objectives at the same time. The building of ties with alumni, the church or clan, employment perks for parents who work in the school, benefits for parents who volunteer in the school, and then we also have community leadership.
So if we look at it, everybody will end up competing at this phase.
That's right, and that would probably be much fairer in terms of opening up access considerably compared to what we had here on the board earlier on.
So the 1 to 2 kilometer radius of a school becomes the competing factor.
I think we need to rethink this whole issue of proximity.
Okay.
I'll show you.
Yeah.
I have a map of Singapore here. One of the key issues we have is that some of the more popular primary schools aren't exactly distributed evenly across Singapore. For example, some of the schools in this area here.
In Bukit Timah, yeah.
That's right. And it's an area that is dominated by upper class housing.
Right.
So why don't we think beyond the confines of 1 or 2 kilometers and say, draw a wider net?
Oh.
And say, in the case of this cluster here, and maybe another cluster here.
But actually with what you're suggesting, it actually goes against the idea of going to a school in your neighborhood.
Not every parent out there is dead set on getting their child into a branded primary school, and that's perfectly okay. This is to provide a greater chance of access.
What you suggested is a pretty radical idea, and I can already hear parents going, no way, that's just a crazy idea. I mean, what would you say to them?
But Steve, we're not trying to make everyone happy. You'll never quite be able to have a system that doesn't privilege a particular group of parents. But there's always, I guess, that tricky business of weighing up pros and cons. I don't think any country in the world has gotten it right.
I've learned that competition for choice primary schools is getting more intense over the years, and even after the latest round of changes, the P1 registration process still ultimately favors those with the resources. So if you can put in the time, the effort, and have the money to invest in the system, you stand a better chance of getting your child into the school of your choice. Perhaps it's time to make some radical changes to the Primary 1 registration process to level the playing field even more.
Every day, the financial world goes through dramatic rise and falls. We'll track the biggest market movers and show you where the opportunities lie. Get the experts' take on the performance of key indices. Plus all the analysis to help you understand forces driving global economies. The daily business news you need, only on CNA. This segment is brought to you by Xeon Corporation.
1 kilometer radius? Check.
They want the kid in the best primary school, they relocate, and up prices.
Alumni? Check.
The most obvious privilege would be legacy benefits.
And when all else fails?
I wrote to many people in MOE.
Talking Point finds out in a special survey. How far will parents go to get their child into their preferred primary school? Sunday on CNA.
Aging population, falling birth rates, shrinking labor force, Japan's biggest challenges since World War II. I'm Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
Tonight on Japan Hour.
失礼します。おいしい。綺麗なお水と暮らす皆さんのご飯を調査したいと思います。行ってきます。めちゃくちゃ出汁効いてますね。完成。はい。
Japan Hour, tonight on CNA. Japan Hour is brought to you by Sumitomo Corporation. And SMBC. This is Asia Now.
It's 6 p.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 3:30 in New Delhi and 5 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Jill Newbronner. At this hour, COP26 talks go into overtime with a new series of draft deals just published on climate pledges and phasing out fossil fuel subsidies. Rodrigo Duterte's daughter will run for Philippine vice president in next year's election. The announcement ends weeks of speculation about Sara Duterte, who's been leading popularity surveys. And thousands protest new vaccination mandates in Melbourne, Australia. COP26 climate talks have closed in on a global deal aimed at limiting devastating global warming. A raft of new draft deals has been published on the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change website following marathon negotiations. A deadlock pushed the summit past its scheduled end on Friday. The draft deal keeps reference to phasing out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies that has been criticized by some nations. They also call for countries to upgrade their climate pledges in 2022. Rich countries are also urged to double their climate adaptation finance by 2025. From 2019 levels. Now, yesterday's draft deal was met with criticism from many countries and activist groups. They say it weakens some of the language from an earlier draft on the phasing out of coal. We spoke with David Levi, Fellow for International Climate Policy and Diplomacy at the United Nations Foundation. Now, he explains why the pressure on finance at this year's summit is much higher than before.
this COP is a particularly important finance COP because of the compounding crises that developing countries are facing. Not only are they confronted to the climate crisis, but they had to face the health crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic and the necessary relief package that would go with it to support their economy, as well as a strong debt crisis, which prevents them to invest in the technologies of the future, to transform economic and energy systems. So the pressure on finance is much higher than usual. And we also passed the year 2020 in silence last year, where developed countries had promised that they would provide $100 billion per year, starting that and every year after that. And they failed to meet that promise. So countries come with a lot of anxiety, a lot of expectations. So in terms of finance, we are realizing every year that the needs are tremendous and not comparable at all with the amounts that are given right now, that are insufficient. But I think we're also evolving in more subtlety and more depth into the finance question and trying to define where the finance should go, which country should it prioritize, to which activity is it going to be more for adaptation or more for mitigation, which sources of funds are more important, because we realize that public and private finance cannot cover the same needs.
A good morning from scientists that marine fisheries in Asia are at risk of collapse in the coming decades, no thanks to the combined impacts of climate change and overfishing. A study says sharks and popular seafood species like groupers and threadfin could plunge to a fraction of their current population by the end of the century. Now, this is especially the case in the South China Sea, where many fish species are already facing the limits of their heat tolerance. But researchers say the depleted marine ecosystem in the East China Sea has a chance to recover under mild climate change and if sustainable fishing practices are adopted. They say immediate action is needed in the next 10 years to prevent irreparable damage to Asia's key oceans. Now, on the other side of the globe, scientists have found that even the wildest parts of the Amazon, untouched by humanity, are not spared from climate change. Hotter, drier conditions over the past 4 decades have decreased the body size of rainforest birds. The changes are thought to be a response to nutritional and physiological changes. Experts say the smaller size is beneficial under climate warming, as animals can cool themselves better, while long wings can allow birds to soar